Hi again then guys, and welcome to another specific review from Gran Turismo Sports Day 1 lineup, and this one leads on very nicely from yesterday's review, which was of course for the Aston Martin Vantage S, an excellent little underdog, a car which is very easy to take for granted, but I don't want to spoil that review too much of course for those who haven't watched it, but this one is a great rival to that car, not in the purest sense because it has around 100 horsepower more, but in a general sense it's a similar kind of vehicle, it occupies a similar place in the market, but ironically, although I said that that Aston was more useful than the V12 version was in Gran Turismo 6, this one, I think, kind of ironically, would have been a better rival for that Aston, because the power of this Jaguar is much closer, in fact it's still more than the V12 had in Gran Turismo 6. Now this car's putting out a very, very impressive 542 horsepower and a really impressive as well 501 pound-feet of torque. Those are two very strong numbers straight off the bat. Now, not too surprisingly, the weight is reasonably high. It's similar again to the Aston, a little bit more, 1650 kilos to the 1610 of the Vantage, so not too much heavier, and given how much power it has, it more than makes up for that. The horsepower per tonne is also significantly better at 328. Again, not quite as high as you might assume, given the kind of power, but of course with that kind of weight that you're lugging around, it's going to be a little bit of a disadvantage there. The stock category for the car is around N500, the Aston is close N400, but you can quite easily bump it up into N500 as well. Now this car is incidentally quite a bit cheaper than the Aston. It's a 128, close enough to 129,000 credit car to the 180,000 of the Vantage S. That's not too surprising. Jags do tend to be cheaper than the closest equivalent Astons in the game. For instance, if you compare most of the XKs or the XKRs in the past of the franchise to the equivalents like the DB9, the DB7, they are typically quite a lot cheaper. Now, the question arises, of course, what is this car actually like to drive? Because it's arguably one of the most significant new additions to the game from day one. Now, again, as I said with that Aston, this is one of those cars that I actually took quite a while to really get the chance to sit down and have a proper just drive with. Not use it in like a mission or a quick race or something like that, but to actually experience the car, to take it in, the look, the sound, the physics, the way it handles, the way it performs, and I have to say they are very well suited against each other. Now, even more so if you bring the specs up to be similar. Of course, the Jag has the advantage straight off the bat, as we already said, both for power and price, which are two pretty significant ones to have, but the way that they handle in particular is very reminiscent of each other. They're both relatively compact, despite not really being small. It's kind of a weird thing when that happens with a car where it's not physically small but it feels like it is. That's a very, very difficult thing to achieve, but they both do it very well. And at the same time, I would say that this Jag, partially to do with the fact that it does have more power and especially more torque, is definitely more playful than the Aston. And to be honest, to be brutally honest, in fact, that can sometimes work against you. The car is so tail happy that it doesn't really want to get in line. And again, the fact that it does have over 100 horsepower more kind of works against you there. If you reduce the power of this car to a similar level to the Vantage, it's a lot more controlled. Now, the Vantage, I would say, is perhaps a better track car, ultimately, but this one I think has more potential when tuned, because this car is very playful, very tail happy, it loves to drift just like the Aston does, but with the Aston, when you want to actually put the power down and get a good lap out of it, depending of course on the tuning, the tyres, and to some degree the way you drive it obviously, it can get the job done. It's competitive, it's fast, and it's deceptively capable. This one on the other hand, it feels like it falls, unfortunately, a little bit the other side of the playful line, where it's too playful. It just wants to play non-stop, and that isn't necessarily the best thing around. In the real world, it's great, because you can have so much fun in it, and lap times don't really matter as much. Of course, in real life, most owners of an F-Type are not going to race it. They're just going to enjoy driving it, and that's the whole point. But I feel like this car, I personally feel at least, could have potentially been in better company in GT6 than now in GT Sport. Not that it doesn't have great rivals, it does, but I think this car would have felt more at home up against stuff like the Alfa 8C and the Maserati Gran Turismo and a couple of others too, wherein, yes, the Aston is a good rival, but they don't feel fully authentic against each other. Whereas in GT6, despite the fact that this does have a lot more power than both the Alfa and the Maserati, it feels much more like that kind of car. It wants to just play, those cars do as well, and also neither of those really achieve the kind of performance and the kind of competitive range that you might expect them to. In a similar way, the F-Type has a lot of potential, but it's almost too playful most of the time to actually accomplish a racing win. You have to really heavily tune it, hone it in, focus it, and drive it with, again, much more focus yourself, not just on the tuning side of things, but on piloting the car than you do with the Aston. If you do, it can certainly offer a lot. For sure, you can win races with it, I'm not saying otherwise, but know what you're getting into with a car like this. For fun, it's fantastic. As a drifter, it's fantastic. For racing, well, it requires a little bit more fettling than the Aston Martin. The Aston's pretty much ready to go. It's a very good car in that respect. This one, not so much. It's more of a sidewinder. It likes to get its tail out and it likes to keep it there, sometimes to the point of overdoing it, as I did in one corner in the video. But overall, certainly worth a look, and it's a lot cheaper than the Aston, which is something that's very, very worth bearing in mind, really. So overall, that's it for this review. Of course, I'll see you guys next time, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.